lunch session used to be the graveyard shift. But now we are on the second session post-lunch without a break, and therefore I know the ominous or onerous work ahead of me. So I'd like to keep it, and I also know that we're running behind schedule, so I'd like to keep it to the point and sharp. So what I want to start out with is kind of pick up on a link that Dr. Saxena raised about the tenor of the conversations that have happened since morning, and start out with a little anecdote about my personal experience. Actually, one of my ex-students who I think may have been in my class back in the late 90s, he happened to pay me a visit in my office recently, and we were just chatting. And he said something that that resonated resonates very much with what Dr. Saxena talked about. What is the purpose of the education that business schools are sort of purported to or sort of chartered to deliver? And this gentleman said that, you know, sir, I remember I took a course, and that was in the second year, straight after my internship, and that course was on strategic marketing. And while we enjoyed quite a bit of that course, but as I was fresh from my summer internship experience, I was kind of, while I enjoyed the esoteric and the intellectual content of the course, I went through the course thinking, will I ever use this stuff? Okay, and now it's been about 13 years since I, went through the education. I just sort of, among other things of seeing you and saying hi, I felt like sharing with you that, now I understand that what we talked about in that class made sense. So the small message that I sort of took away, or the learning that I took away from that, is that I am of the opinion that when in a business school, whether it is 1 year or whether it is 2 years, or whether if it's in a doctoral program more than 2 years, people spend their lives, it cannot be for the vocational needs of selling insurance and any other thing. So I thank Dr. Saxena for very aptly raising that issue. So Amit, I will stay to the brief. What Amit gave me the brief for, first and foremost, thank you for the opportunity of being part of I think the cause that you stand for, and IMT is glad to and is privileged to sort of support this initiative. That there is so much to be done, and we all alone cannot do them all, and therefore we all need to sort of pool our resources to push this. And I don't want to belabor on the matter that has been extensively sort of discoursed on since morning. So I think about this time last year, I stood up over here and I took a tack that and that was a little bit, that was before before lunch, by the way. So the impact had been slightly different, but we said that in lines with what Mr. Bhargav in the morning talked about, that we do a lot of these conclaves and we do a lot of these meetings and seminars. If we could only spend half the time in implementing some of the things that we talk about. And I think I still remember last year around this time, I talked about the fact that, the way I looked at my role coming into a new business school, which was not in the public sector, did not have a lot of the endowments and so on and so forth. And of course, had a past, had a, that went through a little bit of a wobble. I looked at the role as to stop strategizing, roll up my sleeves, and get down to work. And I would like to I not like to depart from that topic that I started about a year ago, and want to stick to it and share with you the kind of work that we have been trying to do at IMT Ghaziabad. And I was thinking about the right metaphor of that work, and what I'm going to be talking about. Some of the things with the curriculum that we are experimenting with and maybe you would be delighted to hear your viewpoints on it. But I was going to start out with the metaphor of trying to change the curriculum. It's sort of like trying to turn a truck around, and on the truck, if the truck's turning radius is x, trying to turn a truck around in a street as narrow as perhaps half x. Okay, so I will talk a little bit about what we saw as things that needed to have been changed. What we actually did and what kind of challenges that we faced, and I think said that if I could share some lessons learned so far. Let me be very honest with you. We are all learning a lesson, probably very many every day in that process. It was interesting that Dr. Bala in the morning gave the metaphor of a symphony. And we felt that, we sort of looked at the 2-year PGDM or the 2-year program, perhaps if not as a symphony, but sort of like a raga, in the sense that, and I'm trying to connect it back to this student story as I just told you, that if we don't do something in the 2 years that the students I'm talking about, let's take this, this period of time that our students stay with us in the institution. If we don't have a very, very deep and visceral sort of engagement with them, it never resonates. And this is supposed to resonate for a long period, perhaps for the rest of their lives. And therefore, it is certainly not pop music that we can play. It probably need to be a bit more deeper than that. And whether it's a symphony or a raga, I think that's we chose that the latter metaphor. And what we found was that a lot of the times students are underprepared in the sense that, of course, they've gone through this very, very rigorous, quantitative metric tests that we talked about, and Pandey talked about in that the issue of these quantified metrics, etc. That seems to sort of correlate with talent, and most importantly, correlate with the potential for the future. We, like everybody else, have a preponderance of these engineering students, and we felt that what is it that they come in with as by way of expectation to a PhD, to a MBA program. We felt that there was a bit of a dissonance with respect to what they understand as the purpose of MBA program is. So we felt that there was a need to sort of engage with the students in a manner where we try to do a little bit of an alap before the rest of the raga took over, in the sense that we felt that they were a little underprepared with respect to the orientation, the framework, and the mindset that they bring before starting their program. Okay, so what we saw is, they come in, they spend about 4 days or 7 days, depending upon which era, in what is called an orientation program, in which there are these, of course, they're getting these functional orientation to the marketing area, OB area, etc., etc., etc. And we felt that this was grossly inadequate, but because we felt that there was probably a need to spend a longer period of engagement with them to perhaps get us all up to the same, the same platform with respect to what this 2 years of this journey is supposed to do to them for the rest of their lives. So so that's what we saw. The other thing that we saw in the curriculum is that there are a bunch of silos in there. There are discipline silos, there are functional silos, there are pedagogical silos. There are, there are of course this favorite Indian debate of context versus concept as to who's the hero. Those are those, context silos, concept silos. There are of course the vocational versus, training versus education silos, etc. So we saw that. Okay, so I'm telling you what we saw before I tell you what what we are attempting to do. The other thing that we saw is that a lot of the material that we teach in the classrooms are dated. There are tectonic shifts happening across the globe with respect to where the power balance, whether it is economic balance or whether it is socio-political balance, shifting across the globe. And we found actually that our curriculum were not adequately capturing that. Okay, and there were we spend too much time doing fancy courses in finance in our curriculum at IMT. We used to. Or fancy courses in analytics, let us say, or marketing mix modeling, etc. But not adequate time on some of these socio-political shifts that are happening that we cannot brush away, that we've talked about adequately in the morning. The next thing that we found was that too many toolbox courses. Okay, so we have these courses which are largely tool-centric. Okay, how to run SPSS, how to run SAS, how to use Stata, etc., etc. So they're very technique-oriented. And without further venturing into this issue about whether the engineers are disproportionately sort of able to get into the MBA education given our screening criteria, we felt that, is this what a management education is supposed to do? So courses which are focused more on the whats and the hows. Okay, so descriptive courses like, okay, in retail industry this has happened, so it's a narration of what has happened in an industry. Okay, which is useful, as our earlier panel discussed about, what is the role of knowledge. We felt that it is important to for managers to figure out focused pedagogy. The focus, I'm sorry to say this, but the focus has been more about the teachers filling their teaching credit requirements rather than the students learning. Okay? And finally, among other things, I'll have to go on. We have a curriculum which is structured by the seasonalities of what we've been talking about, which is placement. Okay, just the other day, somebody came up to me and said that, sir, our summer placement season is about to begin in whatever month, October. However, in our rejig curriculum, marketing appears a little later in November. So can we sort of pull this forward? Okay. How much time do you have? 1 minute. Okay. So So what we decided to do was to sort of basically take on all of these things that I listed. And basically with a few philosophies. One is basically putting the student or the learner in the center of the universe. All right. It is interesting that throughout the morning a lot of Mr. Bhargava talked about why we need to focus on manufacturing. The gentleman from ICICI wanted to focus on why we need to center on sales, etc., etc. But we decided that perhaps leaving aside all these agendas, we should put the key stakeholder, which is the student, his or her agenda right in the center of things that we do. Okay, that's what we did. So we did what we did was basically engaged in an orientation session, or the ALAP session, as I was talking about, for about a month with the students, both online as well as on campus. And we looked at some of the issues in how the shift, evolution of management thought has happened through the periods, who are the people who influenced it, what were the perspectives that drove it, and of course focusing on a lot of the learning processes and so on. We basically remodeled a lot of the flow of the programs and so on, and for the interest of time I won't get into the details of this. But brought in a lot of innovations with respect to the way we make learning happen rather than teaching happen. All right. So basically got into experiential learning, engagement, getting more student engagement into the learning process. So I want to coming back to turning the truck around in a small turning radius. One of the challenges and some of the learnings that I can share with is that the role of the faculty is supreme in this. That at the end of the day, as Dr. Singh was saying, that at the end of the day, an institution, a business school, has got to be driven by the faculty. They have the deepest engagement with the student, which is the stakeholder. So it is very, very critical for the faculty to buy in, and actually not just buy in, but actually participate and partner and own this whole process. And I'm delighted to share with you that I am sort of blessed with fantastic positively motivated bunch of colleagues who are kind of qualitatively different from some of my ex-colleagues, but I love them both, who have been completely in ownership of this process, and they are questioning their own ways of doing things in putting this on the ground. And I can tell you that, and that's why I wanted to focus on implementation, that to me, that is the most exciting change. That is the real change that is sort of helping us get more energized into trying newer and newer things. Faculty are working in teams. They're collaborating within organizations. Not much of it used to happen before. Now I can proudly say that a lot of it is happening. They're collaborating across, working with the industry, working with a lot of our overseas partners. By the way, we have a lot of them, and the number is growing. And of course, we are bringing in the accreditation process to sort of keep us on the rails, so that the truck doesn't get derailed, keep us on time, so that we don't sort of keep the change agenda as a dynamically moving sort of horizon in front of us. So through this process of, and again, I would like to sort of reiterate a point that one of my earlier colleagues raised, that it is imperative that, academia, definitely my institute, is wanting to work with the industry in a very close way to customize curriculum, co-build curriculum, co-teach curriculum. However, the industry obviously needs to invest, both in terms of time and intent, to because it is in developing this partnership or the bridge that is going to make our education more relevant, get the people off, hit the ground running, as we called it. And we have hit some successes with some collaborations in the space of financial analytics, FMCG sector, banking, etc., in which we are working very closely in looking right from the brass tacks as to what we teach, what kind of course curriculum, what, session by session, and keeping a balance of both, the context and the concept in mind. So basically, I would like to finish by saying that in this whole process of curriculum rejig, what we are trying to focus on is to empower the students to focus on the whys more than over and above the what's in the house, and equip them into learning how to learn, because we know that today's skills are going to get obsolete tomorrow. So in that process, what we are seeing is a huge amount of encouragement. And as one of my, I think Mr. Pandey mentioned before, that regardless of where they come from, the student community are extremely talented. So what they need is an enabling environment, so that they can discover for themselves the changes that they can bring to themselves and therefore the rest of the country. So with that, thanks for the opportunity. That's all I have.